You can show support for the content we provide here at Unfound by going to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast, or hitting the join button at Unfound's YouTube channel. John Michael Spira was a 45-year-old from Chicago, Illinois. He was a fantastic guitar player and self-employed. On the evening of February 23rd, 2007, John was at his business with plans to meet a friend at a restaurant at 8:30 p.m. John never arrived. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dunsel, and this is Unfound. Seven years into Unfound's existence, here is something that I've learned. Dollars and possessions are certainly not as big a cause of disappearances as I imagined they would be. Sure, we talk about money and drugs often on this podcast, but really the disappearances connected to them have not been of a type of drug deal gone bad. Instead, we're usually talking more about overdoses that have been covered up, people who are high causing harm to others who are high, and addicts who walk off all on their own. Yet, we do have a few notable disappearances we've covered that could be connected to the economic principle of supply and demand. Dale Kerstetter went missing during a theft of the plant he was guarding. Mary Watkins and Jacqueline Cooper, two women fooled by a man so he could steal their money. Matthew Braswell, who surely died during a scheme to steal checks from people's mailboxes. So it happens. Well, with the disappearance of John Spira, as you will hear, lots of people who were not even connected to each other acted strangely after he went missing. But does this case really come down to risky business? And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linez's website, charleyproject.org. John Spira from an early age had a determined type of mind. He moved out and joined the military when he wasn't getting along with his parents. The first time John saw a guitar, he wanted to master it. This strength of will also helped John with starting his own business with his friend Dave. And at the time of John's disappearance, they'd been business partners for 18 years. Yet problems had developed. John and Dave's partnership had become contentious. In addition, John was in the process of getting divorced at the time of his disappearance. So, on the evening of Friday, February 23rd, 2007, John was at work with some vendors and Dave. Dave's story is that when he left, John was still there with those other people. John was supposed to then meet a friend at 8:30 p.m. He never arrived. The person tried calling John several times with no luck. He was never seen again. His SUV was eventually found parked in the lot behind his business with no signs of anything unusual. However, those vendors who were there that evening when questioned told the opposite story, that they left first and Dave was still there alone with John. No matter how educated we all get with disappearances, we may always be puzzled when so many different people connected to the missing person who don't even know each other act strangely when the investigation starts. Try to figure out why this occurred in John's case while also trying to answer these three questions during the interview. Number 1, is the plastic sheet story substantial, Or is it a very good example of confirmation bias? Number 2, why did John labor to keep his upcoming divorce a secret from Dave? And number 3, is the arson of John's business 6 months after his disappearance actually the best lead concerning this mystery? John's family 100% believes somebody or a group murdered him. The guest for this episode is John's sister, Stephanie McNeil. Unfound News. I sprang a bit of a surprise on all of you this past Monday with a special episode on this podcast feed. Unfound Now, the somewhat resolved cases. I hope you found it informative, and I hope many of you became YouTube subscribers because of it. Next, speaking of Unfound Now, the newest episode came out this past weekend. I covered the very recent disappearance of Fang Jin and her traveling partner, John Root Fitzpatrick. I also do my best to give an analysis of the current situation. Finally, my next live appearance with Dr. Telesco is this upcoming Thursday, October 12th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. We'll be discussing the anatomy of a disappearance. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of John Spira, Stephanie McNeil. Stephanie, welcome to Unfound.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Let's start here as we usually do when we have family members as guests. Talk a little bit about your family. Of course, you are John's sister, but I understand you have at least one other sibling. Why don't you talk about all of your siblings growing up in the Spira family?
So it was the three of us. John's my older brother. He's about a year and a half older than me. And then we have a little brother. Well, I say little, but, we're old now. But he's my younger brother, Tommy. He's 4 years younger than me, 6 years younger than John. And it's just the three of us siblings. We grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago. And, it was good. It was a good childhood. I will say that, it was kind of tough for John. He did not have an easy life growing up. He had a lot of issues with my parents, which always sort of, I never quite understood it, but, he definitely had a tough time with them growing up. And when he was in high school, he ended up going to a school out in Maine.
Wow.
So it was, he was dyslexic and had ADHD. But back then, they said, oh, he's hyper, and put him on meds, and they didn't really understand it back then. In fact, when we were older, probably in our 20s or 30s, he told me that he saw a documentary on dyslexia, and that's when he realized that's what he had. All those years, and I'll tell you what, it really shaped his childhood because, again, people didn't really know about it back then, and he got punished for it big time. It was hard. It was hard.
I bet.
For him growing up. So he joined the Army when he was 17, and that was it. That's when he left home. But we were always pretty close growing up. Of course, he drove me crazy a lot when we were younger, just like older people do. But he was always good to me. He never got mad at me, and I gave him plenty of reasons to. The only time he ever got mad at me was when we were in the car driving, and I'd be singing to a song, and he'd tell me to stop. He'd yell at me, "Stop it! You're ruining the song." Okay. So that's really when he got mad at me. He was just, a pretty easygoing guy, easy to get along with, very kind.
What was the age difference? I'll just ask you about all of the kids. What is the age difference between all three of you?
Yeah, so John's 18 months older than me.
Okay.
And then, I'm about 4 years older than Tommy.
Oh, okay. So pretty close, but still that would be about almost 6 years difference between oldest child and youngest child.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And what about, of course, he's not being interviewed today, but what about Tommy? I'm getting the feeling that maybe John and Tommy not kind of, even though they're both men, kind of a bit different, or what would you say?
Personality-wise, yeah, they're different, but they were very close.
Okay.
They were really close.
They were.
Especially when we got older, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very close. The three of us were, as we got older, we had, pretty much same friends. We'd go out together all the time. We just laughed our asses off because we were both really funny. We did when we were together. We just laughed. It was always fun. There was never any tension or problems between the three of us ever.
Wow.
It was always fun.
Excellent.
Yeah, we were so lucky. We knew it too. I'd always say, I'm so lucky that I not only love my brothers because they're my brothers, but I like them so much. They're like my favorite people. So, but yeah, Tommy and John were close. Even though there was a big spread.
Yeah, 6 years. So he would have been 17 going to the Army, and you're maybe 15, and your other brother is 11. So, it's quite a bit of a spread there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for explaining that. Let's talk now a little bit more about John himself. You already talked a little bit. ADHD, in those days before kind of that was a thing, and I'm 53, so even as a child, I could say, I guess, of the 80s, still maybe not very well understood dyslexia as well. So maybe he had some troubles in school and such, but I know, and of course you introducing me to a band member of his who I've talked to about John's disappearance. He got into music. What do you remember about that, how he got into... I hear he was a fantastic musician. Do you remember how he originally got into that?
Yeah, he was always, he always had something musically. He was always inclined, when we were little, I think he took clarinet lessons and I took flute lessons and, for a few weeks. It didn't last very long, but I remember being younger and him picking up my flute and playing without knowing anything about the flute or how to play. He just picked it up and played, and he could do that with anything. But we didn't really think that much about it until we were older in high school, and his best friend at the time, Bruce Cross, brought over a guitar and showed him a couple chords, and that was it. It was like overnight he became a great guitar player.
Wow.
And then he just played, and he was obsessed. He loved it. It was his passion.
Wow.
Yeah, he was really good.
And he did that. Of course, he went to the Army, came back. We're getting to get into what he did as an adult, but that's something that he always did: play the guitar, practice the guitar. That was his main instrument.
Yeah, it was great. It was great for me because we had a basement in our house, and he'd have all his amps set up and guitars and. He had drums down there, so sometimes the guys would come over and play, and we'd just sit down there and he'd jam, and it was great. It was really fun.
Wow, neat.
It's fun because there's a really old band called Wishbone Ash that I loved, and one of my favorite songs was called Blowing Free. So I made him learn it and play it. I'd always be like, play Blowing Free, and he would. He'd play it, and then years later, his band that he was in at the time, I can't remember what it was called, actually opened for Wishbone Ash.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it was so cool because.
I'm not familiar with. Is this a local Chicago band or something, or what?
No.
Wishbone Ash. Never heard of them.
They're great, 60s, 70s band.
Wow, that's kind of my era. So what kind of music are they?
Rock and roll.
Man, I've never heard of them. And I'm
Yeah.
like a Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin type of guy. So you'd think that I've heard of them. I haven't. I'll have to look that up after we're done talking here. Okay.
They're sort of under the radar, but really good.
All right. Wishbone Ash. Everybody go find Wishbone Ash after you're done listening to this episode. Okay. All right. So he's a guitar player. Of course, you said that he went to the Army. How long, or the military, what branch? But what did he do there? How long was he in there?
So he joined young. He was in the Army, and he went to Colorado. He was a tank guy. They had him in the tanks division.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know exactly what he did. I think he worked on the tanks and stuff, but I don't know exactly what he did while he was there. But he was in for 4 years. And then he lived in, where's Pikes Peak? Colorado Springs. He lived in Colorado Springs.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So he lived there for a while. And other than the military, did he get any education? Did he end up going to college, graduating? Or, of course, he ends up being a very good businessman. But did he have an education?
No, he did not go to college.
He did not. Okay.
No, he did not go to college. So it was, when he was nearing 18, my dad said, you either, join the Army or go to college. You can't stay here. So he joined the Army because, again, the learning disabilities really were hard on him. So college was not for him.
Okay. Very good. And so he gets out of the military, and like I said, of course, when he went missing, he was working for himself, but did he kind of work his way up, or did he start a business on his own right as he got out? What do you remember? And I realize you had your own life to live. Of course, you're becoming a young adult probably around this time. You have your own things to do, but how do you remember, his working career, business career?
Yeah, so he got into cable, the cable business, pretty much right after he got out. He started doing cable stuff, and he was working for some other people, and then he met Dave Steuben, who ended up being his business partner, and they worked, I don't remember the name of the company, but they worked together for a long time, and then those two started a business called UCC Underground Cable Construction Company.
Okay.
So that's what he did. So he was a business owner.
Wow. Okay, so I think that's interesting. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dave. Of course, we're going to talk a lot about Dave eventually. But Dave and he were actually co-workers at another company before they actually owned a business together.
Right.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, very good.
And good friends. They were good friends too.
And I guess what you're also saying is he lived in Colorado Springs for a while, but John eventually found his way back to the Chicago area.
Yeah. He came back and he moved to never lived in the city, but he came back probably, I don't know, within a year or two of leaving the Army. Maybe about a year after. And then he stayed there.
Okay. All right, so he was in Chicago, moved to Maine, which to me sounds like the opposite of Chicago, and then he's in the Army, but then he did find eventually his way back to Chicago, and of course that is where he went missing. So saw a little bit of everything in the United States, Maine to Pikes Peak, and back to Chicago. Okay. What about relationships? And I just want to cover this very general. Of course, he was married to a woman. Her name was Suzanne. What can you say about his relationships just in general at that time? Of course, now working with Dave, going back, let's just say to the 1990s, his relationships.
John, he always liked to have a girlfriend.
Okay.
And he always would have, a long-term relationship, and then kind of followed by another.
Okay.
Suzanne, we actually met her. We were out at a blues bar in Chicago. Gosh, it must have been 89, maybe.
Okay.
89. And, so we met Suzanne at a blues bar, and he ended up marrying her. We initially kind of liked her, but then not so much. But
okay.
That was his wife, who he was just about to divorce when he went missing.
Yeah, and we certainly have to talk about that. All right, so you met her late 80s. They ended up getting married sometime in the 90s, and I think, what were they married for about 15 years at the time of his disappearance, somewhere around there?
Maybe 16 years or so.
Okay.
I can't quite remember.
Okay. Does John have any children?
No.
No children. Never had any children, but Suzanne does have at least one child, and we'll get into that a little later. But those two married, never had any children. John never want any children, or is that just the way things worked out?
Well, Suzanne was 11 years older than John.
Oh, okay.
She had kids, but I don't think John really ever wanted to have kids. He was too busy. He had too many things going on.
I knew the feeling.
So I don't think, he never had a burning desire to have kids.
Okay. Very good. So no children, but he's married to Suzanne, let's just say early 90s, and they're married at the time of his disappearance, but like you've already said, they were headed for a divorce at the time of his disappearance. Your perception regarding, his business, once again, we're going to get a little deeper into this, but just going into the 90s, into the 2000s, him and Dave, how was the business itself doing? Was he doing very well for himself, John?
I always thought they were. We didn't talk a whole lot about it, but it seemed like they were doing really well. They were getting new trucks. They were moving buildings, hiring employees. It seemed like they were really busy, and things were going well. Dave and John, early on, were building a model airplane together, like a big one that you could actually fly.
Wow.
So I guess not a model airplane, but like
a homemade airplane with a propeller that you could go out and fly from the airport.
Yeah,
wow.
And they were both, really into flying. John eventually got his pilot's license, and I think Dave was pretty into flying as well, and they had a big, pretty decent-sized building with a warehouse, and it seemed like they were doing well to me.
Okay, very good. How much at this time, did you really ever talk to? I have two brothers and a sister as well. I mean, we talk a lot, but you and John talk about his business, his life very much. Not to give away where you live, but you were not living in Chicago when he went missing, correct?
Correct.
All right. So
yeah.
Talked to him a lot at that time in the 2000s or not?
Yeah, we talked a lot. I didn't see him as much as I wanted to because we were out here, and I had I'd had my babies and was raising them, so I'd get back to Chicago or he'd come out here, not often enough. But we talked fairly regularly.
Okay.
And kept in contact.
Okay, very good. Let's get into a few of these things now a little bit deeper. Let's just start with his marriage. We've already talked about how he was headed for a divorce. Once again, as I always have to tell some guests and the audience that is listening, we realized that you had your own life to lead, and you weren't keeping tabs on your brother. He's a grown man. He makes his own decisions. But what do you understand about his divorce, why it was happening, your insight into the marriage, and what led to it, ending one way or the other in 2007? What can you say about all of that? And you even stated that you liked Suzanne early on, but things changed. Well, what changed?
Yeah, well, the more we got to know her, I guess the less we really liked her, but tried to get along with her, just, for John's sake. She seemed she never seemed to have any friends. I can't really quite pinpoint what it was about her that we didn't like, but she would go out, all of us, and she would drink a lot to the point of slurring, and just didn't really I didn't like the way she talked to John. She'd say things like, "Shut up, John," and I just thought that was so disrespectful, and it really turned me off on her in terms of the treatment by her of him. And found out much later, she'd had a few affairs, even early on in their relationship, and almost left him. And then in, I want to say 95 or so, her daughter, I know you said we talked about this.
Yeah, that's right. Go ahead. You can bring it up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Her daughter, Heather Rusher, killed her boyfriend. So Heather was 18 at the time and murdered her boyfriend. And that, obviously that really threw a wrench into their lives. It was totally devastating for Suzanne. And she seemed to kind of pull back at that point. Tommy and I got to see John a lot more. I was still back in Chicago then. So, it was good for us because we got to go out with him a lot more than we did when she was around. But she was gone a lot after that. And that really, I think that really changed things. And then, it just got bad. And they were just kind of living together. They had purchased a beautiful house. Was that the late 90s?
Okay.
They purchased a really beautiful house, and so they were living there, but things weren't good. And John is a guy who doesn't like to say a bad thing about anybody, and he never liked to talk about the negative things that were happening in his life. You would have to pull it out of him, to see if anything bad was going on. He always put a positive spin on everything, and so quite knew what was really happening. And I didn't find out about the divorce until Suzanne told me.
Okay.
So
yeah.
We're
going to talk about that a little later. We're going to get into this. It does seem that John was trying to keep his divorce on the down low. What I would like to ask you is, did you ever talk to John about Suzanne, about, John, why is she like this? We're trying to get along with her, but she acts like this. Did you ever have that conversation with him during those years?
I did, because there was one incident I remember going way back where I wanted to go out for dinner with him. Like, hey, John, let's just go out, me and you. And it became this big drama between him and Suzanne of just me having dinner with my brother by ourselves. I didn't know that was a bad thing to do, but apparently it was really bad. And we talked about that, like, why? That's so possessive and controlling. I can't have dinner with my brother by ourselves. And, I guess she felt left out, and maybe it was rude of me. I don't know. I just want to go have dinner with John. And he, he would always stick up for her. She just feels left out, or, he would always stick up for her. Even when they were going through the divorce and it was a miserable divorce, he'd say, I kind of feel sorry for her. She's probably just sitting home by herself. And I was always amazed by that, by his ability to, defend her when she was putting him through so much hell. But, he would never really say anything bad about her.
Did it ever come up, I, of course, didn't know her, but maybe she had some sort of mental health issue or something like that, or was she just a mean person?
That's not anything that came up in terms of mental health.
No, never came up.
Mental health wasn't really, back in the 90s, we didn't go, mental health issues. We just said, she's crazy.
Okay, that's the scientific diagnosis. Okay.
Right.
All right, very good.
But I don't know, but, we just didn't really say oh, maybe she's got some mental health. That just didn't come up.
Okay. All right, now let's move on to this. We talked, of course, about the marriage, which technically they were still married, even though they were headed for divorce at the time of John's disappearance. We're going to get into some things that John said before he went missing that might raise some eyebrows, but we'll move on to this. Now, he did, though, have a girlfriend at the time of his disappearance. Her name is Renata, Renata. What do you know about this? We'll get into more of this later, but just in general, how did the two meet? And did they ever live together at that time before he went missing? What can you say about Renata?
Yeah, so I found out about Renata through Suzanne when she told me they were getting divorced. And she said he's having an affair. And so that's when I found out. Apparently they met at, I think, her and her friends would go see John and his band play, and that's how they met.
Mm-hmm.
And they started dating. They never lived together, but John seemed to really like her, and they spent a lot of time together. John was still living with Suzanne at the time, and they were going through the divorce, and she knew about Renata, and that's just how it was going to be until they got a divorce.
Okay. How long, just once again, I realize you had your own life to live at the time. How long would you say that Renata was in the picture before John went missing? Best guess.
A couple of years.
Oh, a couple years. So, all right. So going on for a couple years. He's still with Suzanne living at home, but he's living with Renata. And when you say that Suzanne told you about Renata, does this mean you found out about Renata before or after John went missing?
Oh, well before.
Well before.
A couple of years. I found out, so Suzanne and I were talking on the phone, and she told me that John was having an affair and that they were going to get a divorce. And that divorce going on for a couple of years.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So we have to remember this. He's married. Like you said, they have this beautiful home, he and Suzanne, but there is Renata, the new woman in John's life. And I guess what we're saying is John doesn't go missing. The divorce happens. Most likely, John and Renata end up being a couple living together eventually if he doesn't go missing. Was that probably the best prediction?
That wasn't his plan.
Okay. All right. What do you think his plan was?
That was not his plan.
Okay.
For John, that he was gonna maybe get his own place, or maybe get a place with another friend of his who was also going through a divorce or had just gotten divorced.
Okay.
Renata said maybe they would be living together, but that's not what John told me.
All right. Very good. All right. Thank you for clearing that up. And I do have to ask you this. Everyone should know, if you'd also like to, what I would call more general coverage, although it was certainly good. True Crime Daily did cover John's disappearance a few years ago on YouTube. Of course, here at Unfound, we go a little more in-depth into things the way we do things here, but it's a good general overview. You might want to check that out. But something that came up, I feel like I have to ask you this. Is it true that there were also other women in John's life? This came out in the True Crime Daily. It's the only reason I'm asking you this. Is that true?
That really bothered me that they went into that so much because, John had a lot of friends, and he had another close friend who was a female. And the police like to think that he was such a player. And he liked girls, but I never considered him a player. He usually would have one person at a time, like Suzanne, and then Renata. But all these multiple women they're talking about, and that tangent that they went on, I don't think was accurate.
Okay, I'm glad I give you an opportunity to talk about it then. So what we're saying is, yes, he's going through a divorce. The marriage is over for all intents and purposes. The only thing that's not over is, we still have to do the paperwork. He has a new woman in his life for a couple years, and to your knowledge, he had a girlfriend who was Renata, and that was it.
To my knowledge,
yeah.
I mean, everybody says he was a big flirt, but I know him. I know how he is. Yeah, I guess he was fun and extremely outgoing and talked to anybody and everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, in terms of him being a player, I didn't really like that.
Okay.
That categorization, but
all right. And that's why I'm giving you an opportunity to talk about it here. So we've had a chance to talk about it. So we were going to move forward believing that he's going through a divorce with Suzanne, and the only other serious woman in his life is Renata. That's how we're going to continue with this interview. We're just going to put that to the side. Okay. This talk of him having multiple girlfriends, we're just going to put that to the side. But I wanted to ask you about that, given that it was in that other show. Let's now talk about Dave Steuben. Now, his last name is S-T-U-B-B, and it's not Stubben, it's Steuben. You've already talked. They met while they were co-workers at a company. Then they became business partners in their own business. They started from scratch. How would you describe Dave? We're going to talk a lot about him in a little bit, but just in general, Dave Steuben as a man, what can you say about him if you've ever met him, etc.?
You know, honestly, I don't know him. I only met him a couple times.
Okay.
John would talk about him. I remember John saying how they had to establish their roles in the business like a marriage. He compared it to being married.
Yeah.
Each person has to, we have to figure out who's going to do what our roles are. But he didn't talk about them that much. And like I said, they were friends for years. They would do stuff together. Dave had a big property in Missouri, a hunting property, so they'd go hunting together. They were working on that airplane together. They bought another business together, and then I don't know, things just went south with them for whatever reason. I think it was financial, but I don't know.
Okay.
So I don't know a lot about him. He was at John's wedding, and I'd only met him a few times.
All right, so you just, once again, you have your own life to live, and you didn't know Dave that well. The only things you knew about him is from what John told you.
Yes.
Okay. What about your other brother? Do you think that he got to know Dave or not?
No, I don't. Probably as much as I knew Dave.
Okay.
He may have met him, more than I did because I was moved out here to Arizona. But yeah, we didn't know Dave Steuben very well.
Okay. All we know is they were in business for 18 years, and we should know that's more than a lot of business partnerships last. And not everything is all the time smooth. I know my family growing up owned a huge car dealership where I grew up. Often there are things that go on. Everybody cares about each other, but people have different opinions. So we shouldn't be surprised. There might be some differences and things in a business, even between friends who have known each other for a long time. Once again, your impression of the main business, this cable business, as best as you could tell, was doing well, or did you say maybe business had slacked off a little bit? What was your impression going into that 2006, 2007 time frame?
I thought it was doing okay at that point.
Okay.
I didn't really know. I mean, he would talk about it, but I didn't know all the specifics of it. I thought they were doing okay.
Okay. Very good. Maybe I should ask you this. Being you have another brother and maybe other family members, parents or cousins or somebody, did you ever hear anything through the grapevine that might have led you to believe that things weren't going so well? Anything that comes to mind?
I know that, I'll tell you one thing that comes to mind is that John was adamant that Suzanne, a couple things actually.
Please.
One, he was adamant that Suzanne did not talk to Dave Steuben during the divorce.
Huh.
He didn't even want Dave Steuben to know. Why? I don't know. But
right.
He was very, very adamant about that. And in fact, John's attorney, divorce attorney, told me they almost got a restraining order against her to prevent her from doing that. I don't know how they could have done that, but they talked about that.
Okay.
That was one thing. And the other thing, what I was going to say.
Anything having to do with Dave? Anything that he had said? Please.
I know what it was. The
Please.
other thing was that John told me he wanted to get out of Universal Cable, and he was looking for a buyer, like a secret partner, to buy him out.
Oh.
I don't know that we ever discussed that with Dave.
Huh.
So, you know, John was looking for a way out at that time. He also was involved in some other business ventures that he did not include Dave on.
All right, so the only thing that he and Dave were involved in together was this cable business.
Yeah, and they had another business that went under too.
Okay.
A year or two before he went missing.
Okay. I just want to ask you now, I'm just going to ask you some very general questions about that 2006 into 2007 era. They are specifically right there on the outline. All the people who listen to Unfound, and for any new people, of course, out there, we do follow outlines for these interviews. I'm just going to ask you these questions. Stephanie, how was your family in general feeling about Dave's life at the time? Were they worried about anything? What would you say?
You mean John's life?
I mean, excuse me, John's life. Excuse me. Yes, John's life. Please.
You know, we were worried about him because of the divorce and how that was going, and, you know, his stress level and things like that. We didn't know too much about the inner workings of his business and his relationship with Dave at that time, which apparently wasn't good. But yeah, we were, normal family concern about how he's doing, getting through his divorce. I know he'd lost some weight the last time we saw him, and he seemed a little, maybe a little stressed out. We had talked to him. Well, I guess we can get back to that, but yeah. So I guess the answer is, we were concerned about him going through the divorce.
Okay, but I'm guessing on the other hand, being that it seems we all now know how you felt about Suzanne. Maybe you felt, well, I'm good. He's getting away from her. Maybe that was the upside of that.
Yeah, it absolutely was.
Okay, all right. So, anytime there's divorce, even if it's going to be an amicable one, that can send, shivers through a family. But given that Suzanne didn't seem to be that great of a person, maybe there was a lot of good things on the horizon for John, had he not gone missing, 2008, 2009. Please.
We were actually very much looking forward to him being divorced and done with that.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next phase in his life, and I know he was too.
Right. Okay. Very good. Did John express to anyone you trust his concerns about anything? Once again, kind of that grapevine type of thing, getting back to you about any concerns about anything going on in his life.
Anybody I trust.
Right. And so that might be your other brother, your other family members. I know you didn't trust Suzanne too much. I know you don't trust Dave too much. So anybody other than that?
Like that he would confide in?
Yes. Please.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who he talked to about what. I may have known that at some point, but I don't remember.
All right.
If he did or not.
Okay.
He talked to us a little bit about it, we together. And I saw him in September and in February before he disappeared, so we talked about it.
Okay.
But who else he confided in, I don't know. Probably Renata.
Okay. And the next question is your impression of how this divorce was going to go. Now, it should be known that we're doing this interview on September 26th, 2023, and I'm trying to reach out to John's attorney at the time. This guy's not gotten back to me yet. He is still alive. He's still a practicing lawyer. In fact, he is on the city's council in Illinois, and he's not gotten back to me. So I hope to ask him some questions about the divorce. Anything he can say, of course, it's not privileged. But how do you think he was going to, how John was going to come out of this divorce, Stephanie? Was it going to be 50-50? Was it going to be fair? Was Suzanne putting up a fight? You know, what was going to be the result of this?
Oh, she was putting up a big fight.
Okay.
It was a hellacious divorce. It was very contentious. But on the very day he went missing, that very morning, both John and Suzanne, they were at the house, and they were talking to the attorney, and they finally, that very morning, agreed on the terms. After 2 years of going back and forth, and she'd agree, and then she wouldn't, and then she'd agree, and the attorney said that he wrote it all up and sent it out that day because he didn't want her to change her mind again, so he got it out as soon as he could. And I actually have a copy of that agreement. It was on his desk when I got there to do the search. So how did he come out in the divorce? You know, neither one of them came out very well. He had to pay her spousal or alimony. There just wasn't a lot. He had a lot of debt for the business that went under. There was some IRS debt he was paying off. They had to sell that house that he loved. They didn't have a lot of equity in it. But yeah, neither one of them came out very well.
Okay. All right. So she wasn't fleecing him. He wasn't fleecing her. It was somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, there just wasn't a lot to fleece, really.
Okay. And we have to remember, maybe what made things at least a little simpler was that they didn't have any children together. That probably, even though it took a long time to get to that point, maybe if they had children, of course, it would have probably been much more complex. Okay. And so we already kind of talked about the money issues. Maybe you said he had some debt from a prior business. But where was he living? So they were still living, even though they were, I guess, estranged. The two of them were still living in the house together.
Yeah, John he told me about that because I'm like, why didn't you just get a place while this was going on instead of living there with her?
Yeah.
He was worried that he would lose some sort of control over the house or something. He just didn't want to do that. So, yeah, they were living together, and it was awful. He said she would, you know, come in and berate him while he was in the shower, you know, like holding him captive in there and just constantly on his case, and it was very difficult.
Okay. Right. Maybe he's a little, you know, and I think I've never been married, and all the listeners know that. But maybe he's thinking, you know, if I move out and I'm out of there for 6 months and we get to this divorce, she may get the house. She may be able to argue that, you know, I gave her the house or something. Maybe that's something that, you know, he was afraid of.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he was worried about.
Right. I gotcha. I've heard of that before. Okay. All right. We'll move up to that day, February 23rd, 2007. It was a Friday, correct?
Yes.
All right, it was a Friday, February 23rd, 2007. Just going to go through the general timeline. What is your understanding of what John did that day, from, as best as you can tell, from him getting up in the morning, I guess, living with Suzanne, going to work, and then at some point that evening or night going missing? What were his movements, as best as you can tell, for that day?
So that very morning, like I said earlier, he was at home with Suzanne, and they talked to John, the attorney. His name is also John. Hammered out the details, and then we think he did his usual breakfast at this place in St. Charles he'd always go. I know during the day he was getting a car detailed to sell. This was a Cadillac Escalade that he'd allowed another business partner in another business to use, who apparently wasn't paying him. So he took the car back, got it detailed, he was going to sell it.
Right, we're going to talk about that a little bit later for the listeners. If you're wondering about this Escalade, we'll come back to that later, but please continue. Thank you, Stephanie, please.
Yeah, So, and so he got to work in the afternoon, and the business, Universal Cable Construction, had a barbecue that night. I guess sometimes on Friday nights they'd have barbecues for their vendors and their employees and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they did, and John never left. That was it. That was the end.
Okay. Now, he did have plans, though, to meet somebody for dinner that night, maybe at like 8:30, something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so he had plans with, a mutual friend of his and Renata's, and they were going to meet in Oak Brook, which I think rush hour is probably half hour, maybe, from West Chicago, where John's office was.
Okay.
Maybe 45 minutes. So they were supposed to meet around 8:30 for dinner. He never showed up. She tried calling him, like, where are you? And he would have had to have left his office probably, I'm just a guess, but maybe 7:45, no later than 7:45, 7:30, 7:45 to get there by 8:30. And his cell phone never left that area. His truck never left that area, and he never made it to dinner. And that was the end. We didn't see him after that.
Okay. So, all right. So he's supposed to meet then, let's just say it at 8:30, somewhere around that time. Your understanding, once again, I know you had your own life to live, but maybe you've learned about this in the last, 16 years. Was this a common thing that he would meet this person or these people for dinner? Or was this the first time? Do you even know?
I think, they were friends. I don't know how common it was for him to go out for dinner. I don't know.
Okay. When he did not show up, of course, he's supposed to be there at a certain time. It's, 10 minutes past when he's supposed to be there, 15 minutes, a half hour. They tried calling him. We know that John does not pick up. Did that worry them? Were they thinking, like, was he in a car wreck? Did he forget? What else did they do to try to track him down? Or did they eventually say, maybe he just blew us off? Or maybe Suzanne got in the way? What was their reasoning? What did they think that the reason was that John didn't show up that evening, that night?
Yeah, I think that she just thought he blew her off because, according to this police report I'm looking at, they were supposed to meet at 8:30. She was 20 minutes late herself. She waited about a half an hour for him, and after he didn't arrive, she just left. She did call him to say, hey, I'm leaving, but she was unable to contact him.
Okay. So I guess what we're saying is, at least document-wise, there's nothing, you're thinking maybe he just blew her off. That was her first thought.
That's what I'm thinking. I've never spoken to her personally.
Oh, you haven't?
I don't know what she was thinking.
Okay.
No, I've never talked to her. I don't know her.
Okay.
But that's just from the police report, from their interview with her.
Okay, very good. So in your opinion, though, he doesn't show up. Did anybody else find out that John didn't show up for this get-together that evening? Were there any red flags, yellow flags going up at that time? When did people find out that he was supposed to be at this dinner and didn't show up? Everybody else. When did everybody else find out?
It's been a long time. I think Renata found out.
Okay.
She got concerned right away. But nothing happened that night as far as I remember. And then the next night, when he didn't show up for his gig in Montgomery, he was supposed to play, and he didn't show up for that. That was a big deal because he's never missed, ever.
Okay.
And so that's when, things kind of started.
That's when everybody started to get worried. So allow me to ask you a few questions once again, as best as you can remember. So he doesn't show up. This woman tries to call him. Of course, he doesn't pick up. She leaves a message. Are we then saying that on Friday night, when John is supposed to be going home to Suzanne that she didn't call anybody, or even the next morning, hey, John didn't come home that night? I realize that he has a new girlfriend, but he's living there. Did she not call anybody like Friday night, Saturday morning? What is your understanding?
No, my understanding is she did not call anybody.
Okay. All right, so everybody has to remember that. I'm not trying to point anybody in any particular direction, but if he's still living at home and he's supposed to be home that night, and even if they are getting divorced, she doesn't raise the red flag, hey, he didn't come home, it's something we have to talk about. All right, so now we're going to the next evening, and John was in this band called the Rabble Rousers, and I had a chance to talk to a member of the band about that night, what he remembered, and what you're saying is, Stephanie, is when he didn't show up there, that is when everybody really knew, you know what, something's going on, because John never misses a performance, right?
Right. I do think Renata was getting pretty frantic Friday night, but
okay.
She, Saturday night after he didn't show up for the show, she got really upset and frantic, and was trying to get Suzanne to file a police report. Contacted the police. Saturday night, I think they went over and looked at Universal Cable and Brian's car house where he used to hang out, and then they just passed it on to a different police agency. Okay. But yeah, after he didn't show up, that was a big deal.
All right, when he doesn't show up for this gig with his band, the Rabble Rousers, and do you remember, so going that night into the next few days, maybe I'll ask you this, was Renata at that performance, and so she's there waiting for John and he doesn't show up? Is it your understanding that she was actually there, wherever that was, that night, waiting for him? Do you even remember?
I think she went there to see if he was going to show up, and he wasn't there.
Yeah.
And that's when she was like, where's John? And then she started making phone calls.
Okay, very good. All right, so we're now into February 24th, which was a Saturday. He went missing seemingly the day before February 23rd of 2007. Yeah. And so Renata's there. We'll just say, yeah, she was there. She's waiting for him. She goes, well, he would never miss, playing with his band. He's not there. And then that's when she starts getting really worried. She starts calling people. For you personally, Stephanie, do you remember finding out that John was missing? How did you find out?
I didn't find out until Sunday.
Okay.
And my dad called me and said he had some disconcerting news, and that John was missing. So I just knew. I knew at that point that he was gone.
You did. That was your knee-jerk reaction, that it was something bad. It wasn't. He just ran off to Vegas for the weekend or something like that. You knew it was much more serious than that.
I knew immediately. I don't know why I knew that, but I knew because he wouldn't go missing, I guess is how I knew.
Right.
He wouldn't just not show up for his gig. He wouldn't have blown a person off on Friday that he was supposed to meet. He wouldn't just leave his truck at Universal Cable. It just wouldn't have happened. Something bad had to have happened. I just knew it.
Okay.
Of course, I thought right away it was Suzanne.
I did. We can't get into theories here, but I can understand. Everybody can understand why you might be thinking that. Certainly, given we talk a lot about divorces and disappearances on this podcast, so I can understand that. Let me ask you this: was your father feeling, and maybe your mother was alive at this time as well?
Yeah. So my mom, like 2 weeks before, John had been out here because my mom had she had cancer and she had surgery.
Okay.
So it was actually 10 days before he went missing. He was here in Arizona, and we were with my mom and my dad and Tommy, and then he was supposed to come back out here on February 28th.
Okay.
Because he was going to play with this band that I knew, and it was my birthday weekend, and we were really psyched for that. Then this happened. So
Right.
Yeah, my parents were both here.
Okay. Would you say that your parents reacted the same way you did to the news? Did your parents also think that something was really, really wrong?
Yes.
They did. Okay. And did they find out through Renata? Did she end up calling them? Who called your parents to let them know that John was missing? Was it Renata?
No, it was a detective.
It was a detective. Okay.
Called my dad at very early hours, 4 or 5 in the morning on Sunday, to say that he was missing, to see if he knew, is he out here?
Mm-hmm.
So that's when my dad found out, and then he called me.
All right. Would you say this was all started due to Renata or somebody else?
Renata.
Renata was the one that instigated all this. She says, John's not at this gig, something's wrong. She starts calling around. So your impression is that she was the one who eventually called the police to say, you know what, my boyfriend, I don't know where he is. He's not here. He's not there. Maybe she went over to the company and saw his truck there. We'll get to the truck in a moment. And she's the one that really got the ball rolling.
She tried to.
Okay.
But they wouldn't, because she wasn't a family member, they wouldn't really take the report from her. They did, they kind of dealt with it, but Suzanne had to call. She didn't call them, I think, until Saturday night. Renata tried telling Suzanne, hey, he's missing, there's something wrong. She actually contacted Suzanne, and Suzanne didn't really do much. It took her a while.
Okay. All right. We already said that he seemingly obviously did not go home on Friday night, and she didn't alert anybody onto this, about this. So that's always going to be.
And she was coerced.
And then eventually you're saying she was coerced to file a report.
Yes.
That's okay. Very good. So let me just go in general. We're going to get much more specifically into some of these words here eventually, but I just want to kind of set it up this way. Okay, so now the police report is finally made. We know John was supposed to meet somebody on Friday night. It's eventually discovered that his vehicle is still at the office, and we'll get into some of the peculiarities of that. But what did Suzanne in general have to say about John's disappearance at the time? Did she ever offer up any opinion as to where he was and what he was doing at the time?
Nothing. She contributed nothing. She didn't really want to cooperate with the police. She had a lawyer right away. She started mentioning drugs, which blew me away because John's never done drugs.
Okay.
She didn't help with any of the searches, or she did nothing.
Okay, so and not even offering a theory like, well, he ran off. I'm just making this up. Just an example. He ran off to Vegas with his new girlfriend. You should not even any theory as to why he wasn't around.
No, in fact, years later, I asked her, what is your theory? I asked her that specific question.
Okay.
She said she didn't have a theory because she wasn't there.
Okay. Let's move on to, we have to remember that John was at work that day. It's verified by several people. Of course, this business was not just him, just he and Dave. They had employees, and they had this cookout for vendors. We're going to dissect this later, but the public story, what does Dave say about him seeing John that, let's just say, Friday evening? What does he say? What did he say when he was tracked down? What did he say?
So he said that when he left, John was sitting at his desk and that there were other people there. That's what he says.
Okay, that's what he says. We're going to get into that later. Did Dave, I'll ask you the same question I asked you about Suzanne. Did Dave ever offer up an opinion, his own opinion, as to what happened to his longtime friend of 18 years, John? Did he ever say, well, this is why he went missing? Did Dave ever offer up a theory at the time?
Not at the time that I know of, no, we did not.
All right, so the guys never said, well, you know, he was depressed, he might have walked off, nothing like that. Never came out of Dave's mouth.
Nope.
Okay. And the other, of course, important person and we're going to get into all of this. Please bear with us, listeners. Renata, at the time, within a few days of John's disappearance, did she ever offer up a theory as to why John was missing? To you?
No, not to me. Not that I recall.
Okay.
I think she may have been leaning towards Steuben because she said that they had a very volatile relationship. That John didn't want to talk to Steuben about the divorce. That Dave could fly off the handle, and other people have said that about him as well.
Okay.
And that I think that's what she was leaning, but you'd have to ask her. I don't.
Okay.
I didn't talk to her.
All right. So we have Suzanne. Not even though she's living under the same roof as John, can't offer up a theory. We have Dave. We have his story about last seeing John, but he can't offer up a theory. And then with Renata, it sounds like she's suspicious of Dave. Still sounds a little nebulous to me. So the missing persons report was eventually filed by Suzanne. She was forced to do that. Is that what you said, Stephanie?
Yeah, she was coerced.
Okay.
Renata kept calling her to report this.
Okay. When the police do get involved, what do they do? What can you say? And I realize you did not live there at the time, but what were they doing? What did they do, if anything?
So initially, I think on Saturday night they DuPage went to Universal Cable and to Brian's Char House, like I said earlier, to see if they could find him, but they didn't. Then they passed, DuPage County Sheriff's Department passed it back to St. Charles, which is the city that he lived in. And they, I can't quite remember, but I think both agencies may have been at the business at like early in the morning, and they got Dave up. They contacted Dave to get him up, come unlock the gates. You know, this guy's missing. And so they started their investigation at that point.
Okay. Do they ever ask Suzanne, Dave, Renata, anybody else connected to John, you know, pretty much in his daily life? Do they ever ask any of them to take polygraph tests? If so, who took them, who didn't take them? What can you say about that?
Yes, they asked Dave and Suzanne both to take polygraph tests. They both got lawyers.
When asked to do that, ask, please.
Renata wanted to take it. Renata kept trying to talk to them. They wouldn't interview her. They didn't talk to her until July. And then they never did do a polygraph on her. She was the only one willing to do a polygraph, and they didn't do it. They went and talked to her. They just kept blowing her off. And but yeah, Suzanne got a lawyer. She didn't take a polygraph, and Dave never took one either.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's now get deeper into this investigation. These are some of the things that the police kind of looked at, but it sounds to me that you and your family have a deeper insight into some of these things than maybe the police did. So we're just going to call this the rest of the investigation, but we kind of have to set this up by talking about the weather. Did a snowstorm come in like right after that Friday, that Saturday night? What was the situation with the weather at the time of John's disappearance?
So Friday night, apparently it snowed a ton.
Okay.
A lot on Friday night, yeah.
All right, so everybody should keep that in mind once again when we start talking about footprints and tire tracks and things like that. Let's first talk about the interior of where John was. This would have been the UCC business where he and Dave, they owned it together. They have employees. Whether I just have some questions. Any signs of violence? Anything missing? And what can you say about this sheet of plastic? But first of all, any signs of violence to your understanding regarding the interior? And what I mean by signs of violence, anything broken, anything have any, of course, any blood or anything like that. Those are what we mean by any signs of violence.
No, there weren't any.
Zero. Okay. Anything that Dave or any employees eventually said, you know what, John's missing, but also this is missing. A piece of equipment, a computer, anything like that. Anything missing from there?
Yeah, so they had some rolls of that heavy-duty plastic sheeting.
Okay.
You know, this screen. And so that was missing.
Okay. All right, so...
To my dad, very alarming that was missing too.
Okay, so this piece of plastic, like I guess we might call like industrial strength plastic, in contrast to like the plastic you might wrap a sandwich in. This is heavy duty stuff that they might wrap cable in when they bury it.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like good plastic, you know, they hang. I don't know. It's heavy duty thick plastic that comes in rolls.
Okay. And what you're saying is maybe not a roll of it was missing, but a large sheet somebody noticed was missing from Friday to Monday.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was gone.
Okay. All right, so interior, this plastic is missing, could mean something, but no signs of violence regarding John, no bullet holes or, you know, in a wall, in a door, any broken mirrors or windows, nothing like that. Moving on, you're going to have to explain, as best you can in audio terms, the situation with John's truck. I understand it was a Ford Excursion, which is like the Ford's version of a Suburban. They don't make them anymore. But what was the weirdness about his truck? Something weird about where it was parked and where it ended up. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so at Universal Cable, you know, it sits kind of on a street front, and there's a parking lot that anybody can pull into in the front. And then there's a gate, and then there's a parking lot in the back. You open the gate and you go into that back parking lot. So Friday night, his truck was parked in the front. Seems to be the general consensus that he always parked in the front. Keep in mind also that this Ford Excursion was a company vehicle. It was his. He used it as his personal vehicle, but it was owned by Universal Cable.
Oh, okay, very good.
They had a financial interest in that truck.
Okay.
So it's parked in the front lot Friday night, and then somehow Friday night it got moved to the back parking lot into Dave Steuben's spot. So we know that it was moved Friday night because when they went to the business to look for John, there was no snow underneath that truck. Mm-hmm. So it had to have been moved before it started snowing a ton. And so, you know, coincidentally, Dave moved from the front to the back right into Steuben's spot.
Was Dave, of course, like you said, it's a business vehicle. Was Dave known to ever drive that vehicle at all? Or was that, even though it's a company vehicle, it was John that usually drove it?
It was John's. It was, you know, pretty much his car.
All right, everybody just accepted that John drove that vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. Did Dave or any of the other employees ever have an explanation of how, when John was there on Friday into Friday evening, that his vehicle was in the front, but when people went over there later, that it was parked not just in the back, but in Dave Steuben's, I guess, marked parking lot in the back of the property? Any of them ever offer up an explanation for that?
No.
Okay. Anything unusual about, I keep calling it a truck, but like I said, it's more like a huge SUV. Anything unusual about it? Where were the keys to this vehicle? Were the keys ever found to it? What can you say about any of that? Was it locked? Anything?
I don't think they ever found his keys.
Huh.
His wallet. Yeah. I know they got into the truck,
Mm-hmm.
and they got his stuff out. You know, he had his gym bag in there and computer, but his wallet, his phone, and I think the keys were all missing.
Okay. Being that he was a musician, did he keep his guitar in the vehicle or just always keep it at home? Was that in the vehicle or was that back at the house?
Back at the house.
Back at the house. Okay. So we have this curious, I mean, I guess it's possible that John might have moved it from the front of the back, but being that it was, John would have never parked that vehicle in Dave Steuben's spot, right?
I don't think he would. Why would he?
Right.
But here's the deal. The truck was in the front.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody left. John's got to go to Oakbrook. Why would he get in his truck, move it, open the gate, and move his car to the back before he leaves? It doesn't make sense.
Right.
There would be no reason for him to get in his truck and move it to the back lot.
Okay.
What would be the point of that?
And
just about to leave.
And we should make the point that the way you understand this get-together, this person he was meeting, he was planning to drive by himself to this. He wasn't planning on, for example, taking a taxi or anything like this. This was before Uber and Lyft. He was going to be driving himself there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So it's not like, well, you know what, I'm going to be leaving, and I don't want to leave, I don't want to leave this vehicle sitting out here in the front. Maybe it'll get vandalized or something. So I'm going to put it behind the gate and then get a taxi. You don't think that that's possible?
I don't think that's possible.
Okay, so we have the truck, and your understanding, though, is the keys to this Ford Excursion are missing to this day, 16 years later?
Yeah, as far as I recall, they did not recover his keys, his phone, his wallet.
Okay.
I guess he had this little black, like a little notebook that was never recovered either.
Right, and going back to what I asked you about before, regarding the snow, there was no snow under the truck, so the vehicle had been moved to the back before it started to snow.
Yep, that's what I got from that.
Okay, right.
Police report, when they said no snow underneath, I'm like, well, then this truck had to have been moved on Friday night.
Okay.
Before it started snowing.
All right. Did Dave Steuben, and I realized you have not spoken to him very much over the past 16 years, but maybe you spoke to him early on, maybe not. You can tell the listeners one way or the other. Did he have an opinion on why the truck that John usually drove was in his parking space? Did he ever offer up a reason as to why that was?
We never talked about that, and I didn't even realize that until much later after I did a FOIA request and I got the police reports and I saw that and I'm like, well, that's interesting.
Huh.
So I never discussed that with Dave. I don't think anybody's ever asked him.
Okay, and I guess what we should also say is Dave never brought it up all on his own either.
No.
He never said, well, it's really curious that vehicle ended up in my spot. John would never do that. It took you getting the paperwork to find that out.
Yeah, the only thing he said, and I'm looking at a police report right now, it says, Dave said his vehicle was parked, well, let's see, it says, Dave said he believed John was in his office when he left, but was not sure. He last saw John in his office talking to somebody else. Dave said he left through the rear entrance just after the last vendor left. There was no one left in the warehouse area when Dave left. Dave said his vehicle was parked near the gas pump just outside the rear door. This parking space in the gated yard where John's vehicle was located was Dave's normal spot. So that, to me, was really weird. That afternoon, Dave had to park next to his normal spot due to the fact that someone else's vehicle was parked there during the barbecue. He did say that John's truck was not parked in that spot when he left.
Okay.
So Dave saying he said he left around 7. John's truck wasn't parked there when he left on Friday night, but lo and behold, it's in Dave's spot.
Okay.
Later.
All right. It's curious. All right. So that is the truck situation. Moving on, I just have to ask, being that this is Chicago, they're doing kind of utility work and everything. To your knowledge, did this company ever have any dealings with anybody like in the Chicago mafia? Because, you know, my interpretation of kind of when you start getting into construction and things in big cities, that sometimes you run into that. To your knowledge, did Dave and John ever have any dealings with people like that? Did they have any problems with people like that?
Not to my knowledge, but I will say that one of the detectives was leaning that way. Last we talked, thought that maybe there was some mob involvement with this. I don't know. I don't have any knowledge of that. You know, I'm just looking at, well, let's focus on the last people to see him.
Right.
You know, in that really short window of time that somebody had an opportunity. Who was there is what I'm looking at. But they want to talk about the mob or the mafia or whatever. I have no clue with that.
All right. I just want to ask you that again, though. You're saying that an investigator just within the last few years has expressed the idea that John was made to disappear due to some sort of mafia hit or something. A police officer actually told you that?
Yeah, a detective.
Okay. That's my ask.
Not that it was anything definitive.
Yeah.
But just a theory.
Okay. All right. That's.
You know, there are people saying, "Oh, he owed a lot of people money." I don't know. Maybe he did. I don't know.
All right. I just wanted to make sure why I asked that question is because I knew that a investigator just recently. We have to remember this disappearance, 16 and a half years old. And here we are, you know, within the last couple of years, we have an investigator talking about the mob. That seems to me to be a little out of left field, but that's why I wanted to ask you about that. Just, and also so the listeners know. Let's move on to the phone information. You've already kind of touched upon it about the pings. Why don't we talk about that again? What is the phone information regarding John? We know that his phone is missing to this day, but the pings, do we know what the records are? Who was the last person he texted or called? What do you know about all of that, Stephanie?
Yeah, so the information I have is that the phone pinged in that area of his business. It never left. The phone never left is what they said, that area. And it pinged until around 11:30 when it stopped. So it was pinging in that area until 11:30 when it stopped. I know the person that he was supposed to have dinner with tried calling him. I think Renata tried calling him several times. But that last call was to the person he made plans with.
Okay. Do you have John's phone records from that night?
I don't have the
Okay.
records. I know that the last call he made was at 7:09 p.m.
Okay, and that was to who?
And that was to his friend who he's going to meet for dinner.
Okay.
7:09 p.m. His last outgoing call.
Okay.
And then, like I said earlier, he would have had to have left no later than 7:30, 7:45. So whatever, and then his phone never leaves the area. So whatever happened, in my opinion, happened between 7:10 and probably 7:45.
Okay. All right. So, and was texting a thing back in 2007? It might have been maybe not the kind of texting we understand today, but so to your knowledge, the last time he used his phone was 7:09.
Yes, that's my understanding. Is 7:09 was the last outgoing call.
Okay. Let's move on to talk about Dave Steuben a little more deeply. I will just remind everybody, he says that when he left that evening, there were other people there. And do we know what Dave says he did for the rest of that night? Maybe you told me it had something to do with one of his kids taken to a sporting practice or something. What is his alibi for Friday night, after he left the business?
So he says that he left around 7. He lives like 10 minutes from the office. Says he got home around 7:30. stayed home for 30 to 45 minutes. Then he drove his son to hockey practice in Glen Ellen, another town over, and dropped him off around 8:45, and then went back to his house. And then stayed at home until he had to go back and pick his son up. So I will tell you that I was told by one of the detectives years ago that his wife said he never came back to the house.
Okay. All right. So Dave has one story. It seems that his wife has something a little bit different there. All right, so that's his alibi. Seems kind of solid, but maybe his wife is undermining all of that time. And as you've already stated, it seems that this disappearance happened sometime between 7:15 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. of that Friday. But Dave is saying that he had already left the business by that time, by 7:15, right?
Yeah, he says he left work sometime after 7 p.m.
Okay. He also said something else, though. Did he say, regarding John's disappearance, did he say something to somebody, I don't know if it was you, that, well, this isn't unusual, John went away a lot. Did he say that? Did Dave say that?
He did. He said that, and so did Suzanne.
Suzanne said that, too. And when they say a lot, you mean when they say go away, did you mean that to be a couple days, a week? What do you think?
I have no idea what that meant, because he's never not returned a call to me. He's never been missing as far as, in my life. He's always available and there, calls me back. I never knew him to go missing ever.
Okay.
As far as Dave, I don't know. John had been out to Arizona, like I said, like the week before because of my mom's surgery. And I don't think he mentioned that he was going to be out of town then. So maybe that's, I don't know. All right. So Dave kind of maybe poo-pooing, at least in the beginning, John's disappearance, saying, I don't know, he used to go away for a week all the time, but to your knowledge, to your other brother's knowledge, to your parents' knowledge, to other friends who knew, his band, his band members and the rabble-rousers, that's all news to them. That's not their impression of John. Never. Okay. Never missed a gig. Never went missing. This is the first.
Okay.
This is the first.
All right. Now I have to ask you once again. It's right there on the outline. I'm going to ask you about this story, and this is you personally. Of course, a lot of these things you've kind of found out secondhand. You did not live in the area, but you've done spectacular work since then. I want to give you a lot of credit, Stephanie. But this is a story that I believe you experienced one-on-one with Dave shortly after John went missing. What did he say about snow shoveling?
Oh, so when I went out to the business, I found out about John being missing on Sunday and flew in Wednesday, and Thursday I was at the office. And at that point, it didn't occur to me that Dave Steuben would have anything to do with this, but I was sitting there, we were talking, and he said he had to go because he had to go shovel Suzanne's snow. And I just thought, he said a couple things that I thought were weird. One, he said, John hasn't been around very much in the last couple of years. And I thought to myself, well, that must have pissed you off. I mean, he's your business partner. He's not around the last couple of years. That must have made you really mad. I didn't say anything about it. And then he said, I gotta go to Suzanne's and shovel her snow. And he knew at that point that I was looking at Suzanne, like she had something to do with this. And I just thought that was really weird, because if John's trying to prevent her from talking to Dave, how are they in touch? I thought that was kind of strange. But that's what he did. He went over and shoveled her snow.
As far as you know, I mean, you didn't follow him, but that's what he said he was doing. He said he was going over to John's estranged, almost divorced wife's house to shovel her snow, whereas you're thinking, I didn't even know that Dave and Suzanne even communicated.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
Okay.
And why would he go shovel her snow when he knows we think that she may have had something to do with this?
Uh-huh. Okay. That is curious, and I want to ask you a little bit more about that a little bit later. But what is something that you stated in there, maybe we have to remind everybody, is that it's also curious because going back to the divorce of Suzanne and Dave, or Suzanne and John, that the divorce was trying to be, I guess John was trying to keep it a secret from Dave, right? That was the impression everybody got.
Yes.
Okay. When do you think that Dave found out about the divorce that was going to happen between John and Suzanne, as best as you can tell? Do you think it's possible that Dave Steuben found out about this divorce that was going to happen on February 23rd, 2007?
I think he knew about it before then, but recently before then.
Okay. All right. So, like I said, it's very curious. John's trying to keep a lot of information. At least that's the way you understood it at the time. The rest of your family understood it. And then all of a sudden, less than a week after the disappearance, Dave's going over to Suzanne's, allegedly to shovel her snow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. In 2023, Dave Steuben, what has he done with his life? We're going to get to... no, I'm going to ask you about that actually right now regarding Dave. He says that he left and John was still there with other people. But you or the police tracked these other people down. What did they say about that same evening of February 23rd, 2007? Do these other people's stories contradict what Dave said?
Yes.
All right, please talk about that.
They say that Dave and John were the last ones there.
All right, so just as an example, not getting anybody's names into this. So Dave is saying that John was still there with Tom, Dick, and Harry. But then when Tom, Dick, and Harry were finally tracked down to talk about John, they said, no, we left, and it was actually Dave who was still there with John. Is that right?
Yeah, both of those guys were interviewed separately, and they both said, when I left, it was just John and Dave.
Okay. Alrighty, and do you think that this, as best as you can tell, would this have been around that 7:15, 7:20, 7:25 p.m. time frame that we've talked about this disappearance probably happening?
Yeah, I think those guys left earlier, like 6:30.
Oh, okay.
Before 7.
Okay.
I can't remember. I'd have to look back on that, but yeah, I think they left. Actually,
all I'm trying to establish here is Dave has his story, and then two other guys have their stories.
Right.
And they're different. Okay. What did Dave Steuben do with his life after 2007? For example, is he still married to the same woman that he was in 2007? You're not.
As far as I know, they're still married. I do think he moved out for a while.
Okay.
With his girlfriend.
Okay.
That I got from a pretty reliable source, but is it true or not? I don't know for sure, but that's what I was told. And he still owned the business.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into what happened in the business 6 months after that. But I guess what I'm asking you is, has he had any problems with the law? Any other people around him go missing? Any problems with other business partners? To your knowledge, if you know.
I know that I think he got a DUI and an assault charge.
He did.
After.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. DUI. Pretty sure assault. Yeah, so he had some issues.
Okay.
And
all right.
He didn't. In the very beginning, he seemed somewhat concerned and helpful. But then he just shut down.
Okay.
And
yeah, to the point that he's going over to Suzanne's and shoveling her snow.
Right, and even at that point, up till April, he was talking to me. Because I didn't think, I still at that point wasn't thinking that he had anything to do with it. And he said he said a private investigator came to speak with him, and I'm like, well, yeah, you were the last guy to see him, of course. And then I was like, well, do you feel accused? And he said, yeah. And then I started getting like, well, that's interesting. And then he just shut down, wouldn't speak to the police anymore. He wouldn't, if they came knocking on his door, he'd shut the door. He got a lawyer, and he hasn't talked to them since.
Right. You said that he wouldn't take a polygraph test, as an example. Okay. Well, let's move now. So that's Dave Steuben. Maybe something going on there. He says one thing about when he left, but these two other witnesses have a different recollection of what went on that Friday evening. But he does have this alibi. He says he went home, took his son somewhere, but then maybe his wife is kind of undermining that. That will be for all of you to figure out. And maybe we have to also look at this point of John withholding information from Dave regarding this divorce, and that might be relevant to their business. But once again, we don't get into theories here, but Dave is certainly somebody that should be considered. But let's now move to the person you first thought was responsible for this disappearance, and that was Suzanne. What is her alibi for that evening of Friday? Do you even know? Does she have a story? Can anybody corroborate it?
No, she didn't really talk much either. What she did say was that she would keep telling the same story. She'd always tell the same one. She actually told the police that some people lie and can't keep their stories straight, but that she'll tell the same story 20 times over and never change it. I think she just said she was home.
Okay. By herself?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that's her alibi. Of course, nobody's there to verify it. And as you've already stated a couple times, at least in your family, John goes missing. You and your family thought that probably she was responsible. Right? That was your first, was your knee-jerk reaction to this. Okay, so that's her alibi.
I'd even asked him when he was in town the week before, and he was talking about how awful it was with her. I said, do you think she'd ever hire somebody? And he said, no.
All right. And that is in the outline. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. I thought that it was John's comment, so you actually asked him about it, and he dismissed it.
Right, he said no. That wouldn't happen.
And please.
I thought about it. I thought about her doing that enough to ask him if that was a possibility. It was a serious question at the time.
I can understand why. We've covered quite a few disappearances on Unfound where people go missing during the course of a divorce, although I will say John's disappearance a little more unique compared to those others, given some of the other things were going on in his life. But you did ask him, but then he dismissed it.
Yeah, he totally dismissed it.
Okay.
No, not.
Okay, but we have to remember, this is what? How many days before he went missing did you ask him that?
It had been a couple weeks before.
Just a couple weeks before. Wow. Yeah. I have to ask you, how quickly did that question come to your mind when you found out that John was missing? I guess right within a split second, right?
Split second.
Okay. Now here's a big question. Being that it seems Suzanne would kind of make a pretty good suspect if we're to believe that foul play occurred with John's disappearance. But then we have Dave. Seems like he told this story about, the alibi and who was there last at the building doesn't seem to go together. And then he talks about going over to shoveling snow for Suzanne. I just have to ask you, before this all happened, what was your impression of the relationship between Dave and Suzanne? Did they know each other? Did the couples ever, the business partners ever double date sometimes? How well did Dave and Suzanne know each other?
I think pretty well. Like I said, they used to be friends. And so they would hang out with Dave and his wife and his kids and do stuff socially together. At least up until, a couple of years before he went missing.
I guess what I'm also asking you is, since John's disappearance, has anybody ever been able to establish that maybe that Dave and Suzanne were kind of keeping in contact with each other, like behind the scenes without John's knowledge, something like that? Has that ever been established? I mean, being that Dave's going over to shovel her snow, it means they're in contact with each other somehow after John's disappearance. What do you think about all that?
Well, the only thing I know is that John was trying to have them not talk. Right. Apparently, I think this came from Renata, is that every time they'd have a fight or something, she threatened to call Dave. And I don't know why that was such a big threat to him, but it was. She threatened to call Dave, or, he just didn't want them talking. So I don't know if they were, they may have been, but I don't know to what extent.
Okay. Because I think, once again, we don't do theories on this, so we don't go down into Conspiracyville and Theoryville and all that. But I think what a lot of people have heard so far is, well, Suzanne surely would have had maybe a pretty decent reason to make John disappear, and then with Dave and his story, it seems like maybe he might be responsible, but the two of them don't seem like two peas in a pod, so it's hard to imagine them working together on this. And that's what I'm asking you, is that given their relationship, how, is that something that occurs to you?
Listen, anything's possible in this case. There are so many twists and turns and possibilities, and anything's possible. Is that number one on my list? No. Okay. I think there are a lot of, you could probably make the argument that's not where I'm going, but
okay.
To me, anybody involved in his life, everybody's a suspect.
Right.
Because what's going on.
Gotcha. Now, we can't forget about this. Suzanne does have a murderer in her family, and it's her daughter. So do we know, of course, this murder, I think, happened back in the mid-90s, so this would have been like 12 years later when this disappearance occurred. Was the daughter still in jail? Where was she? Does anybody know where Suzanne's daughter was when John went missing?
That day? No.
Yeah, February 23rd, 2007. Where was her daughter? Any ideas?
Probably in I don't know. We never really went down that road.
Okay.
But it probably occurred to me, but we didn't really investigate that.
Okay.
She was out of prison at that point, and she had a daughter. John and Suzanne, they were in touch with her a lot. They would go to New York to see her, and she never said a word to us after he went missing. Nothing.
Okay. Just want to remind everybody that Suzanne's daughter in around 1995 killed her boyfriend. And once again, I don't know what the circumstances were. I don't know how long the sentence was. But if you're going to have it, I have to ask that. Find out if she was still in jail. I just have to ask that. But the big question is, where is Suzanne now in 2023? What happened to Suzanne?
Well, she's dead now. She died 2010, and she had she had some disease. I'm not sure what it was, but apparently her landlord found her in her apartment on her floor, dead. The medical examiner said it was natural causes. We didn't find out for 6 months.
Wow. Okay. Did, at least on paper, did John and Suzanne end up getting divorced?
No.
So they were still married at the time of her death in 2010?
Yes.
All right. So did she continue to live in the house? What all happened there over I guess if it's 2010, 3 years later, what went on in those 3 years for Suzanne?
No. The house was foreclosed and she moved back to New York.
Wow. Okay. We now have to talk about some other issues regarding John's disappearance that maybe just aren't as high profile, but you would, as you can tell, maybe for the listeners, Steph sent me a lot of information, and there are a lot of other unusual things besides just Suzanne and the business and Dave and all of that. We talked early on about this Escalade repossession that had to do with another business that John was moved in, that was involved in, John owned, and this happened right before he went missing, and it's kind of, I guess, eventually kind of connected to Renata. What was this issue with this Escalade, and this guy then meets up with Renata? What can you say about all that?
So John had this Escalade, and he had to take it back from this guy, Dave Coates, I think his last name is. John was doing this other business called Flight Matrix at the time. Something about leasing Lear jets or some of they had these big plans. And this guy, Dave, didn't really care for John, I was told by the other partner, who is now dead also. At any rate, I guess he wasn't paying John for the vehicle, so John came and took it back. And I thought it kind of odd that that guy and Renata somehow got into the yard at Universal Cable right after he went missing and were looking around. I didn't know how those two had gotten together. So that was kind of interesting and strange to me.
Yeah, especially since Renata, she seems like an innocent party in all this. She's actually the one that got this all started. Looking for John, expecting him at that music gig. He's not there. She starts calling people, doing, I guess, what we would say was all the right things. But then on the other hand, she's hooking up with this guy who had ticked John off, and she and this guy are breaking into the UCC property. Is that the best way to explain it? They broke into it?
Yeah, not inside the building, just kind of like outside on the grounds, just looking for things and evidence. So, yeah, I thought that was strange.
Did you ever how did you find it? First of all, how did you find out about that? Do you remember?
Police report about it, and I think she told me.
She told you? Oh, she told you. And did she ever explain what she's doing hanging out with a guy who John had ticked off? Did she ever explain that?
No. She never explained that. I guess they found there was a club or like a big wooden piece of wood that they thought had blood on it. They gave it to the police. It was tested. It was not blood, apparently. But, yeah, I remember thinking that was strange. I had so much information come. I mean, you could see this case has so much information.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. The whole thing is mind-boggling.
I realize that. I realize that. It's just, that's something, though, that really comes out of left field in this whole disappearance, that just when you think you have a good understanding of it, suddenly his girlfriend and some guy who John obviously did not get along with, was not pleased with the work that this guy was doing in this other business. Suddenly they're hooking up and going onto the UCC property, trespassing, and even if that piece of that wood or whatever had something on it, it would not have been admissible because it was collected illegally. They're going and doing that, and then Renata doesn't even explain why she did that. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's
I thought it was strange.
okay. We also, even when it comes to John's band, the Rabble Rousers, there was a unique response to all of this regarding the band, I guess, manager, whose name is Rich, and then this photographer, to the point where it seemed Rich was trying to tell all of the musicians that, yeah, just tell everybody that, yeah, John did show up for that gig on that Saturday night, when we know that John did not. This is once again somebody Rich, who John was friends with. They were in the band together for a long time. Why don't you put that all in your own words, Stephanie?
Yeah, I don't even know what to think about that. He was in this band, and him and Rich were best friends. And when John went missing, we took some of those. They had a ton of photographs on their website, and we used those to, put on our website that we've made. And they took them away and said, we're going to sue you for copyright, and found out that Rich apparently told people not to say, if a reporter calls, yeah, John actually played Saturday night. And I got that from a reporter. When all this was initially starting. Well, he said that John showed up Saturday night.
Did you ever have a chance to talk to Rich about this? Did he really say that was this just some reporter misunderstanding or something? Do you ever have a chance to talk to Rich about that?
I didn't ever talk to him specifically about that.
No.
I did talk to him later. It was like in July, about his lack of assistance and help, and taking the accusing or threatening to sue us for using the pictures.
Yeah.
And, well, why? I just didn't understand it. This is your best friend, so I didn't understand that. But I'll tell you that another band member, Rick, has been enormously helpful to us and supportive, and participates in everything. And he was just with us in Chicago a couple weekends ago, helping us with flyers, and he's been a gem. So, and apparently they thought, and I got this from Rick a couple weeks ago, that John would come back.
Yep.
And I said, but had he ever missed a gig? No. But they thought he would come back. They just thought, he's going through this divorce, and he's having issues, and maybe stressed out, he'll come back. So that kind of maybe explains some of that reluctancy to put it out there in the public domain, when they thought this is just personal problems that John's had.
And the listeners should know, Stephanie did give me Rick. I guess he's the keyboardist in the Rabble Rousers back then, and I also had a chance to talk to Rick myself. And a couple things that stood out to me, Stephanie, was that he did not have any idea that Rich and this photographer had given you such a hard time about those things. He said that was all news to him. He also said that it was news to him that Rich was telling some of the band members to just say, oh yeah, that John was at the gig that night. That was also news to him. I guess I was the first one who ever said that to him, at least the way he remembered it.
Yeah, I'd never really brought that up with him.
Okay.
No reason to.
So. Okay. All right, so the listeners can take that for what it's worth. Moving on. Now, this is the other perplexing part of this disappearance, is regarding a billboard and the fire. Why don't we first talk about the billboard? 6 months later, you, I guess, got a billboard financed with a tarp or something like that, and it got taken down twice. Want to explain all of that, where it was and why you did it and what happened?
So, right across the street from Universal Cable Construction is a big field. And so, with the DuPage County Sheriff's Department, we decided to put up a huge billboard right across the street with John's pictures on it and everything. So, I had one made. It was big. It was like 20 feet by 5 feet. Really just a banner. And then my friends put it, attached it to, big 2x4s and 10x4s and put it in the ground. It was pretty solid. And it was right across the street from where he disappeared from. That billboard went in September 14th, probably around 7 p.m. There were people, I don't know who, but people at Universal Cable watching it go up. Nobody came over to help or say anything, but they saw it go up Friday night, and then it disappeared. And Sunday, the building was on fire. So Brian from Brian's Char House called me Sunday night and said, "Hey, I just drove by the business and it's in flames." And there were a bunch of fire engines there. They couldn't go in the building because thousands of rounds of ammunition were going off. So there was a big fire. The place was decimated. And my first question was, when I contacted the detectives, was, where's the sign? Where's the sign? Because I felt it was a huge coincidence. We put that sign up, less than 48 hours ago, and now the sign's gone. The building's on fire. It was crazy.
So the building where John was last seen, his business with Dave, went up in flames 6 months later after he went missing, and it was just 48 hours after you put up this billboard about John's disappearance right across the street.
Yes.
Okay. Was there ever this fire accidental, on purpose? What did they determine?
Arson.
So intentionally, I think they called it incendiary. We'll just call it an intentional fire set by someone. To your knowledge, have they ever caught who did that?
No.
All right. Do you ever have any idea of how the fire got started? Was it started with gasoline, with a flare gun? Any idea of how the fire even started at all?
I don't know.
No.
Yeah, I don't know how it started.
I have to ask you this. Being that you said you FOIA'd information for John's disappearance, have you ever tried to do a FOIA on the investigation of the fire?
Yes.
You have? Okay.
Every time I've done one, I've requested information, but I just got a report. It's pretty... There's not a lot of information in it.
All right, so it doesn't say, for example, how the fire got started, when the fire got started, anything like that?
It talks about where it started, and it just says it's incendiary.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say arson, but I've been told they said it was arson.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very limited information on that.
Okay. And something interesting, though, that you told me, I'm not sure we need to get into the business specifics of this, but the business was owned by John and Dave, but the property and the buildings were actually in Suzanne and Dave's wife's names. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So if this building burned down, it would then be Suzanne and Dave's wife who would be actually getting the insurance money, I guess. Is that how it worked out? Do you know?
My understanding is that there was a huge payout on that, and some of that, I think, went to Suzanne.
Okay.
But I don't have all the information on that, so I don't know for sure.
Okay, so this fire happens, and it's not something, I guess, I mean, Dave's married to her, but it's not like the money would be necessarily going straight to Dave. It was arson, trying to pull something like this, insurance fraud, I guess is what we would call it. That's not exactly how it would work. But what happened on that property? So the building burns down. It's arson, still unsolved over 16 years later. What happens to that property?
Nothing. It just sat. So Universal Cable moved out of that building, moved into another building, and that property just sat and sat and sat. I don't know what happened to it. I was by there a couple weeks ago, and there are people, there's activity there, there's a business there. I don't know what it is. It's not Universal Cable. It's something else. So I'm not sure if it's being leased out or what the situation is exactly.
Okay, so so another building was built on that property then?
No, well, the structure remained, but it was pretty well totaled.
It was gutted.
So
I guess
the
what
brick
they said.
structure is still there, just the internal.
All right, so it got what they. All right, was gutted. Okay, understood. And does Dave still run this company UCC, or does that business even still exist?
I don't think it exists anymore.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Now, there's maybe one more unusual thing, at least one more unusual thing that we're going to be talking about for the purposes of this episode. And that is, there's another disappearance. John goes missing, but it seems he knew a woman who also knew somebody else who went missing. Scott Arcaro, Arcaro. Please explain that to the listeners. And this also happened right around the same time.
Such a weird coincidence. So they had these go-go dancers in their band.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was good friends with John. And she also had a good friend named Scott Arcaro who went missing the night before John. John and Scott didn't know each other, but it's just a strange, weird coincidence connection. You know, how many missing people do you know in your lifetime? And she knew two guys who went missing within 24 hours of each other.
That is crazy.
There's any relation at all, I don't think, but just kind of a weird coincidence. You know, he went, so there are several missing people. It's John, Scott Arcaro, Stacy Peterson, Lisa Stevick.
Yeah.
All this was going at the same time, around the same time. And so the Lisa Stevick, you know, John was in the news a lot, and then Lisa Stevick went missing, and then she was all over the news. And then Stacy Peterson went missing, and obviously, you know, that just blew up. And there's some weird connections between John's case and her case, and there's, you know, just some strange coincidences and information.
Yeah, did I read somewhere that is it possible that John knew Scott Peterson or something? Or they hung out, they went.
You mean
Drew Peterson, I'm sorry, Scott Peterson, California, Drew Peterson. Yeah, Drew Peterson. Wasn't there something that they might have known each other or run into each other at one time or something like that?
Well, Drew Peterson had a bar in Montgomery where John used to play, his band used to play in Montgomery. I don't think it was at Drew Peterson's bar. John and Drew both have lived in Bolingbrook. John had since moved. They both, I think Drew Peterson is a pilot or was a pilot, and they both used DuPage Airport. Drew's brother-in-law or somebody he knew was a cable guy. So there's strange.
Okay.
I don't think it means anything, but just kind of interesting.
Right. And for the listeners, regarding Scott Arcaro, I'm going to take a look into that, and I'll probably just have a little bit of a commentary on it in the final part of this episode, just to catch everybody up on that. You know, I've already kind of looked into it. They don't seem to be connected, but I will put something on the record before this episode is over. I want to ask you just some final questions here, Stephanie. Given that is John now considered to be deceased? Has he ever been declared deceased?
He has not been legally declared deceased.
All right. So I guess what we're then saying is that nobody, including Suzanne, if he ever had any life insurance, nobody got any paid out.
Correct.
All right. And we have to remember she only lived for 3 years after this anyway, but
he had life insurance on him, but it lapsed because he was a missing person, not because he was dead. So that just lapsed.
Okay, right. He's a missing person. Life insurance will not pay out for missing people, and being that he was not declared deceased, so not sure there could be a life insurance angle to this. Just the next question. Any conspicuous spending by Suzanne or Dave after John disappeared? To your knowledge.
Not that I know of. I will tell you there was an American Express card. It was a company card.
Okay.
But it was John's. But his card was used twice. Once in September after he went missing, and once in December.
Wow. How did you find that out?
A collection agency called.
Wow. Called you.
I'm like, yeah, me too. And we're like, what are you talking about? Well, he's got these charges. And they, of course we sent it to DuPage County, but they never really did anything with that. And how do you, his credit card used twice.
Do we know what the charges were for? Do we know how much they were? Do you have that in your records? Do you remember?
2 purchases, September 07, December 07. I don't know. I don't know what the charges were. I seem to recall they were related to the business, but I don't remember.
Do you know? Do you have it in your records how much those purchases were for?
No.
Okay.
Nominal charges.
Now I could be wrong, but wouldn't that September charge have been right around the same time that the fire happened?
Yeah, the fire happened in September.
So there's a charge out of nowhere. There's a charge on this card, and then the fire happens the exact same month.
Yes.
Wow.
And another charge in December. Yeah.
In December. Okay, never been explained. I guess Dave didn't have any explanation for it. And I guess, was it your thinking that at least when John went missing, that card went missing with him?
I don't know. I mean, his wallet was missing, so whatever card he had in his wallet went missing. I don't know if that was in his wallet. So
okay.
For sure.
All right. Just wonder if somebody made a mistake of some type. But I guess what we're saying, that being that a collection agency was calling you, it means the card was used and then the bill was never paid.
Correct.
I wonder if that bill ended up getting paid.
I don't think so. I always thought that was a pretty big deal when I heard about that. But
yeah, I agree with you.
Didn't really think so.
Very interesting. Okay. Once again, something else to throw in there regarding, a lot of information here, and that's why this interview is over 2 hours long. All of you are now seeing why this is I'm splitting this into 2 episodes that everybody's going to find out eventually when listening to this. But as you can see, we're packing a lot in here, a lot to talk about. One last question regarding Suzanne and Dave. Given that, certainly we're always trying to keep an open mind here at Unfound, but we just have to continue to talk about these two. Any proof that Suzanne and Dave were close until she died in 2010? Any proof that those two got together, given that, Suzanne was known to date other men? Any chance that Suzanne and Dave actually had a thing going on, anything like that, until she died in 2010?
I don't think so. I have no proof of that, or even any indications that they were, a thing at all. Did they keep in contact after? I believe they did. I think they had to talk business in terms of, the business, the business asset and the fire money and all that. So, but were they a thing? I don't think so. I don't know.
Okay.
Anything's possible, like I said. I mean, there are so many different ways you could look at this.
I guess what we're also saying, maybe the unspoken part about all of this regarding Suzanne and Dave is that Suzanne not once, to your knowledge, ever pointed the finger at Dave and said, I think Dave caused John's disappearance, right? She never did that.
No, and she stood up for him.
She stood up for Dave. And then to do the same thing with Dave, given that this divorce was going on, Dave never said, you know what, I think Suzanne could be responsible for John's disappearance. He never said that.
He never said that to me.
Okay. All right. Stephanie, the last 16 and a half years, I know you've done a lot of fabulous work. I know you've done a lot of interviews. Of course, I got to watch the True Crime Daily YouTube video, for example. Can you speak for your family in talking about the last 16 and a half years, speaking for your brother and anybody else in your family, parents, if they're still with us? What can you say about how bad the last 16 and a half years have been?
Well, it's, decimated our family. He was special. Obviously, we think he was special, and we were very close. It's hard to describe. My mom has since died. She just died about a year and a half ago with no answers. So that's another hit. And, every day you wake up, it's another day without answers. And it's just been devastating. It's been life-changing. I think it impacted, it impacted all of us differently. We're all still grieving.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop because we don't, it never ends. It's not like we got to, have a funeral for him and say goodbye. That is such an important ritual. When people die, I've come to realize how important that is, because you get to say goodbye and you get to have your kind of send off. But we never got to do that with John. And it's just every day you wake up and wonder, what the hell happened? Who could have done this? And that takes a toll. It's very devastating. So it's been really difficult. I think it impacted, my family here in Arizona, because all I wanted to do was be back in Illinois doing searches and getting answers, and my kids were little, and so it's been really tough. Now it's just kind of part of our lives. It's just a piece of our lives, and we just have to deal with it. But I don't want to stop, because I don't think John would want me to stop. I think John is really mad. If he could be, he'd be livid and want to find out who did this. And so, there's only so much I can do.
Right.
After all this time, people die, people forget. I forget. I've forgotten a lot. The police, the detectives, they're not interested anymore, and so there's only so much I can do. I run out of ideas. We had that poster, the flyer thing, a couple weekends ago when I was in town, and but those events are getting fewer and fewer. A lot of years pass between those, so there's only so much you can do. But if the families don't do anything, the police don't do anything.
All right, that's true. Absolutely true.
You have to keep going. There's no manual on how to deal with a missing person when they go missing. There's no book. I think I told you. I went to the bookstore after he went missing to find out, okay, what do I do? What steps do I take?
Yeah.
Like, there's no book on this. There's no instructions. So you have to learn as you go, and it's been quite a journey. A journey I do not want to be on.
Yeah, and all the while, you have your own life to lead. You're a mother. I'm guessing you have a job of some type. You have your own life to live, and then you have this on top of it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and work has helped a lot. I work a lot, and so that's when I'm working, I don't have to think about it. So that's been good. But it definitely impacted my relationship with my kids, because I don't feel like I was there as much as I should have been. Not to say that we have a great relationship, but I would have been a better mom had this not happened, I feel.
It's very common. I've done over 300 of these interviews now, mostly talking to family members, Stephanie, and what we always talk about is balance, trying to find that balance between trying to figure out what happened with a missing loved one and then living your own life and being a good mother, wife, good employee or business owner and whatever else. And everybody struggles with that, trying to find that balance. It's difficult, especially for parents who have lost children, mainly adult children. They're so focused on finding out what happened to their one child, but also they can't forget about, of course, caring for all their other children. And, trying to find that balance. Many people I've talked to, mainly mothers, have talked about how that can be a struggle. So you're not alone in thinking of things, it's hard trying to schedule everything, your own life, and then making sure that John is not forgotten.
Yeah, it's being so far away too has had its challenges. And then there's guilt. I'm not doing enough. I should do more. So it's and I know I'm not alone in thinking that. I'm sure a lot of missing people's families have the same struggles. It just never ends because there's never an end yet.
Now, you did have, just within the last couple of weeks, you did have an event up there in Chicago. A bunch of people got together for some searches, putting up flyers. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll conclude this interview. What went on there? How many people showed up? What did you do?
There was a handful of us. We just went around and put up posters and, just in the areas where he went missing, and just to remind people that we're still there.
Mm-hmm.
I called some media, but I think it was in one newspaper. So people definitely have forgotten. But, we do have a Facebook page, Missing John Spira, and there are so many people who are so great and wonderful and supportive. It just blows my mind, really, how supportive people have been all these years later. A lot of our friends from high school, they're the diehards. They're at everything.
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing. John would be absolutely astounded by these friends who've just been there from day one, and some who just came out of the woodwork and helped us. And so that's been pretty nice. So yeah, some of the diehards were there last a couple weekends ago when we did our little event. But it's harder and harder to get people together for this because it is so many years later.
I should have asked you, going back a little bit into the discussion of all these technical details, and then I want you to, of course, mention that Facebook page and anything else, any other social media here in a moment. I want to go back to the fire. It's something you said, that when the fire was happening, that thousands of rounds of ammunition were going off, and that's why they had to let this thing burn. That's to believe that's Dave's ammunition that he was storing at the business?
I guess so. I think that, some of it may have been John's because he would go hunting.
Okay.
And some of it may have been, there was another guy who is named Dan Malpin. He worked there, and he also owned the property in Missouri with Dave Steuben.
Okay.
At least that's what I was told, which was a hunting property. So it could have been all of theirs. I don't know, but it was a lot of rounds, like a crazy amount of rounds of ammunition.
Okay. Can we then say, has anybody ever alleged, once again, given that John is missing and there's probably foul play, has anybody ever alleged that there were guns kept at that business as well?
I've never heard that.
Never heard that. Okay. Just wanted to...
Not to say that it's not a possibility, but I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Haven't heard anything like that because as a gun owner myself, when I hear ammunition being someplace, usually there are guns nearby, and so I felt that I needed to ask that. Just wanted to follow up with that. Why don't you... Please, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say also about the poster or the billboard that went missing.
Yeah.
Right after that fire happened, we decided to put up another one. It wasn't as big. It wasn't in the same exact spot, but that was found dismantled. Just right after we put it up, somebody dismantled it and took it. Gone.
Stole it. It's gone.
Yeah, it was gone. It was just taken apart. There was some wood left, but it was taken apart. And people always say, "Oh, you should have put cameras on it. You should have put cameras on it." Well, we did, but then they took them down because it just kept catching all the cars that were going by. So they took them down, and then lo and behold, somebody dismantled the sign, and we didn't catch it.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's a lot. There's certainly a lot. We've certainly packed a lot into this 2-hour and 20-minute interview, Stephanie. So why don't we finish up with you mentioning the Facebook page. Of course, anywhere else that you can be found on social media regarding John's disappearance.
Yeah, I'm missing John Spira. That's the Facebook page. That's pretty much it. We used to have johnspira.com. We don't have that anymore. So it's just the Facebook page now, missing John Spira. Mm-hmm. And so people can friend us. I'm not on it a whole lot unless something's going on or I found something out. I don't post too much, but that's the page.
Okay. Stephanie, any final words before we complete this interview?
No, I just really appreciate your interest in John's case and helps keep it going. And I wish I had answers. We still hope, and these interviews, I think, help us keep this alive and keep it going and keep people interested in this, so that the person or people who did this to John, and this is a murder case now, it's a homicide case, and they know who they are, feel some pressure.
Right. That's what we try to do. And we have had certainly some success, and I certainly hope that putting this out there can, help you move all of this forward, get some more answers here. Of course, we have so many people working in a business like this. Dave's not the only one there. Maybe some of these other people who were working there, these years later, maybe they know something. They've been maybe fearful about coming forward, or they suddenly remember something. Anything like that. That's what we're always, hoping to do with these episodes, surely. And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Okay, well, thank you again for having me on.
You're welcome. And that was my September 26th, 2023 interview with Stephanie McNeil, sister of John Spira. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. Given the wealth of information John's family collected over the last 16 years, Stephanie and I missed a few things in our talk that I want to tell all of you about now. And a couple of those points will also be follow-ups to topics discussed in the interview. There are quite a few, so bear with me. First, the fire. If you can believe this, after it had occurred, Dave told John's family that he thought John may have caused it. Yes, even though John had been missing for 6 months at that point, Dave also tried to point the finger at Stephanie as being the arsonist. Second, John's money situation. It was not good. He owed his own business over $300,000 in 2007 and was in debt to the tune of almost $50,000 in another business venture. Third, John's desire to hide his divorce from Dave. In the divorce settlement that was about to be signed between John and Suzanne, there was a provision that neither was allowed to contact business partners. Of course, since I don't think Suzanne had any contacts of that type, what it essentially meant was that Suzanne was not allowed to talk to Dave or anybody else about any businesses concerning John. Fourth, the intentional fire that destroyed the business. If you were wondering, the insurance company did pay out on the claim, despite the arson being unsolved to this day. Fifth, the disappearance of Scott Arcaro, who went missing the day before from the same area, and he and John seemed to have mutual friends. His remains were found in March 2013. No cause of death has been listed. However, police have been quoted in articles saying that they believe someone murdered Scott, yet no suspects have been named publicly. Scott had a history of drug charges and mixing with the wrong crowd. Sixth, and finally, in speaking to John's fellow band member, I learned a few things. The biggest point was that all the musicians thought John would eventually show back up alive. They were thinking this even weeks after his disappearance. The other point was that the band members did not really share much to each other about their lives outside of the band. They got together, they played, they went home. That was it. So this band member who spoke to me could not really give me any insight into Suzanne, Dave, or anybody else John knew. Now for my summation. The way I see it, we have quite the paradox for John's disappearance. What do I mean? We have Suzanne, a person who had a lot of motives to want John dead. Yet she seemingly did not have the opportunity or the ability to make it happen on her own. On the other hand, we have Dave, a person who had the opportunity and ability to make John disappear. Yet, in my opinion, the motive is unclear. What, Dave killed John over business? Did he kill him because John didn't tell Dave about his divorce? Even if this were spur of the moment, Dave cleaned up the area that well? Sure, the paradox is resolved by thinking that the two became a team. Suzanne with the desire and Dave with the means and opportunity. And it was planned so it would be nice and neat. And Dave shoveling Suzanne's sidewalk could tell us they knew each other better than everyone suspected. However, there are problems with this thinking. Why would Suzanne be involved in a disappearance in which she would have to know that she would not be able to collect on John's life insurance? She doesn't seem like the type to let money slip through her fingers. Yes, I know the fire insurance payout, but would she really want to wait 6 months or a year for her money? And there's no guarantee that the insurance company would pay the burn off. Likewise, why would Dave volunteer himself to be part of a scheme in which from day one everybody would suspect he was a murderer all on his own? Because that would be predictable even before they hatched the plan. The biggest problem, and this is despite Dave going to shovel Suzanne's sidewalk or whatever, if he even did that, is that each of the two would know enough about the other to never even bring up the murder of John as an idea. Why do I say that? If the disappearance were Dave's idea, why bring it up to Suzanne, who was nuts? If the disappearance were Suzanne's idea, really she thought Dave, John's longtime friend, had the potential to be a good partner in this? That Dave wouldn't go blab to John in like 2 seconds? Because here's what we all know. In anything, we don't bring up ideas and plans to people we don't trust. Why? It's risky business. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of John Spira, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast to partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.